Annette, I am fascinated by the fact that both Darwin and Freud, early on in their careers, did pioneering research on the vagus nerve and sort of started to develop some of these ideas before, getting distracted by these like scientifically defining ideas that they came to later. I'm really curious how you discovered polyvagal theory and how you came to some of this.
Well, polyvagal theory, I guess I should say that when I first started in the mental health field, you immediately think psychology. So if I was told later that I was going to be needing to know more neurobiology and neuroscience, I would have probably said, yeah, right. And that really was the case when I was going through my college courses for my degree work and everything. We do learn a lot about psychology, and of course, that has to do with Freud and Darwin, and so we learned all these bits and pieces. My knowledge of polyvagal theory actually didn't come into existence for me until I was actually already starting to work in the field. Once I started working in the field of mental health, I was actually working with youth. And because of that, I was introduced to the ACEs model, which is the adverse childhood experiences. And what that comes down to is childhood trauma. So once I started getting introduced into more trauma work, and I did have a little trauma work when I was going through my degree work. It was more historical trauma, more generational trauma, and that type of stuff. But not really getting into really the meat of trauma until afterwards. I then had to put myself back through school to learn more about emotional trauma, and that was where my certification through that came up. But it was during that I discovered polyvagal theory, and the way Porges kind of brought that a little bit more into focus. Because prior to him, it really was just our nervous system was looked at as a binary system. It was either stress on or stress off. And he was able to say, but wait a minute, we have trauma here, and trauma just didn't fit into that that model of binary. So with his theory and his evolution, he realized with the evolutionary patterns, it started making things come together and make sense. So that was kind of my introduction into polyvagal. It really wasn't until much later when I started learning more about trauma.
Yeah, exploring science that doesn't fit into a binary model. This is very much
Hmm.
right down secular sexuality's lane. Uh,
There you go.
Obviously, we're not equipped to provide everybody watching this with an associate's level understanding of neurobiology tonight, and there's a lot
Yes.
to cover. So I'm hoping you can kind of walk us through the evolution of the vagus nerve and sort of the hierarchy that goes along with that.
Hmm. We do have Ooh, there's a lot there. I'll
Sure.
try to break it down the best I can, and to be a little bit just not get so in depth, because you can easily go down so much with a lot of this. So it can definitely get to be sometimes a little bit overbearing for some people, and you kind of get a little lost. So I try to keep it a little bit simple here, because we're looking at an evolutionary gap between about 200 million years old and 500 million years old. And so, again, like I said earlier, originally it was just meant our nervous system was looked at as really our autonomic nervous system was just that of a binary. It was either sympathetic on or parasympathetic on. You were either at rest or you were either at stressed. So when the polyvagal theory kind of came into play, we now had that was when it was discovered that we really had a third circuitry, and that brings in that ventral vagal, which is all about that social. It brings the social aspect into play. And I should state that when we're talking about polyvagal theory, and we're going to be hearing things like the vagus nerve, people are kind of thinking, wait, this doesn't make sense. These are two different things. Poly really is just about many. Vagal is referring to the vagus nerve. So you'll see that our vagus nerves runs from the base of our skull down, and it does branch out into many different pieces. So that's kind of where the thought is on polyvagal. And this, of course, is a theory about that. And so it all kind of goes with our nervous system, and it all kind of entails the evolution of our autonomic nervous system, which originally, like I mentioned, was either sympathetic or parasympathetic, which is your fight, flight, or your rest and digest. So this kind of took it to that new level. Well, broke it down, I should say, into those three levels. So in that hierarchy level, we're going to start at the very top of the level, which is our newest system. It's that about 200 million years old, and it is all about social engagement. This is very much just a mammalian thing as well. It's kind of specifically to the mammalian group. And so again, it comes with that social aspect to it. So what this is doing is, it's kind of, I should have probably gone the other direction. But because what happens is in this state, this is a great state. This is the state where we are happy, where we are functioning. The world around us is safe. We look for social cues in our life when we're entering parties, when we're entering environments. Our brains are automatically kind of searching for those social cues, because evolution, through our evolution, from as far back as what we're going to go down here on this ladder of about 5 million years old, it's all about keeping us safe. So for years and years and years, it's really our nervous system has been set up to keep us safe. So what happens is in the newest circuitry, this vagal form, it really is not only just about keeping us safe, but we're keeping safe with others. And our bodies are searching for those cues. Now, our vagus nerve is kind of controls a lot of our facial features. So what it's doing is, this is where we see those facial expressions, maybe a tone of voice, maybe we're listening with a different type of an ear. So we're searching for those cues to, is this safe? Is this a good environment for me to be in? And later on, we talk about a little bit more about co-regulation, and that's kind of where this kind of comes in, because you want that safe zone. So, again, this is that happiness zone. This is great things are happening. We're good. We're calm. This is that fantastic, sweet zone we would like to stay in, but that's not reality, unfortunately. And reality is a lot of us dip into this next zone, which is the sympathetic activation. This is your flight, fright. This is where a lot of anxiety rests. This is where a lot of anger and frustration it kind of is. So as we are going through our days and you're hitting those challenges and those stressors and things, that's going to put us into that level. So we've now slipped out of that calm and rest and relaxation level, and now we're being activated. Those internal alarms are being set off because, again, through our evolutionary system, this was our fight flight. This is all designed to keep us safe. Back in the caveman days, our ancestors and stuff were out there running around, and, they needed to know if they saw a wild animal at them or something like that, their body needs to be able to protect them and respond in such a way. So that's exactly what it did. It would ready their body to either stay and fight or to get ready to flee. You get that increased heart rate. You get that increased, that shallow breathing. Maybe the muscles are getting ready to either tense up so that you can, again, fight or flee. During this time of that type of the system, when those alarms are going off, your body is being flooded with cortisol and flooded with adrenaline, and our bodies just aren't meant to stay in this state. It becomes overwhelmed and becomes short-circuited. So that's when that drops us down into that final bottom level, which is the dorsal vagal, and the dorsal vagal shutdown. It is our oldest, most primitive piece of the vagal system, and or of the nervous system. And what that does is that comes in as a self-preservation, and that's going to shut you down. It's going to take your system and say, you've overloaded it, we're going to shut you down so that you can go ahead and get that rest, get that restoration. And this is where we see a lot of people in the depressive state. This is where we see people have kind of gone inwards and kind of shut down or have disassociated. Back in the 500 million years ago, the animals and stuff that were and the life organisms that were happening in this time, they were very this was a life preserving time for them, and they just kind of they're you know weren't very active or anything like that. And it was also a thought of, if I make myself small, if I make myself not move very much, I'm going to be safe. So it's kind of that same thing now. And so even though we are now in a today's world, much of those levels still are within us. Our nervous system still very much protects us every day, whether or not the threat is actually real or not. All your body knows is that I'm feeling a certain stress, or I'm feeling a certain fear, or whatever it might be. And so it immediately will jump to, well, now we've got to fight or flight, or now we've got to freeze this system. And that all comes all the way back from our evolutionary past, millions of years ago, is still very much part of our life today. And so this is why sometimes people will react a certain way to different stressors, and not really understand the reason why.
Mm.
So, and they're just their body's natural biological, neurological pieces coming out. It's just trying to keep us safe.
Well, so then complex mammals have this really sophisticated system. I think you can make the argument that this is how apes came to dominate the world,
Mhm.
where we alternate between, I guess, these like three primary modes of operation. What does
Yes.
that mean for how humans function or function with one another?
Looking back, well, it plays a lot with how we function and how we interact with others, and that is what becomes our stressors. So we're looking at that evolutionary hierarchy, and our body again is trying to keep us safe, but sometimes it's keeping us either too safe to where we don't engage with others, or sometimes we look at others as a threat even though they might not be, but because of our own past. And for me, I deal a lot with trauma. So for me, it's a lot of people who might have some unresolved trauma in their past that is keeping them in that awareness zone of, this is not a safe place for me to be. I need to, either leave, or I need to disassociate, or whatever. So they become now non-functioning humans in society or with partners or anything like that. And it's not necessarily a character flaw within them. It's just something has happened to them. And what we say in trauma is, it's not what's wrong with somebody, it's what has happened to somebody.
Mm,
And there's a big difference in that, because we often will sit there and say, what is wrong with you? Why can't you just, it's just a party, or it's just we're just going out for this. But what they might not realize is they have something in their past that has occurred that was never resolved, or whatnot. And that becomes a different stressor upon them. Their body reacts in such a way. So if your body is reacting in that way, you're not going to be able to function in society. You're not going to be able to function very well with a partner or get along with others. As well as if you are, if you're good and you are able to self-regulate and you've had all that within you, then you are able to work well with others. I always look at people who are having a hard time functioning with others, maybe in the workplace or even with partners. Those that I work with, the first thing I go to is something that we've learned in psychology, and that is attachment theory. How were
mm.
you brought up? How were you raised? Were you tended to when your needs were needed, when you had needs? Were you over tended to where you just expect things to be your way, or were you just kind of left in abandonment? You kind of had to fend for yourself. And so a lot of these things are within us, and it really affects how we function as humans, and not only just on our own, but within society. We are social creatures. We are supposed to be working within a society and within an environment. And for a lot of people, it's just not safe. And like we've mentioned earlier, we've got that vagus, the vagus nerves going on, and especially that ventral vagus that was in charge of those facial features and things of that nature. So we're constantly, again, on that scan. Is it safe for me to be here? Am I going to be accepted here? And if you don't have that acceptance, if you don't have that safety, you're not going to engage. You're going to disconnect, and it's going to become this, well, maybe they just don't want to be here, or maybe, you start getting these false, people start coming up with different things about you, or, it turns into this big blow up thing. So really understanding our nervous system, how it works, how that comes out as behavior, can help us function in society, or it's going to take people and keep them in their homes, not going to want to function, disassociate, kind of collapse in. So
Mm. Yeah, broadly speaking, what are some of the levers that kind of push and pull us from one mode to another? I heard you mention safety is kind of the hallmark of all of this, but how does that operate for somebody to move from that, ventral vagal, sympathetic, and then dorsal vagal kind of state?
yeah, there's a lot of different ways. Everybody is different, and knowing that is going to be really key. And so you've got a couple of different things that we're dealing with. You can either self-regulate yourself or co-regulate yourself. And that co-regulation happens when we're up there in that ventral vagal. And what happens is, if you are co-regulating with somebody, that means you have somebody else, or maybe multiple people, that you're it's that extra support system. And what happens is you kind of can help each other out with bringing you back, maybe up from that activation, mode that's going on. If you've dipped down into the sympathetic activation, having somebody there to kind of help you and support, and be somebody who's up in that vagal system already, the ventral vagal part ladder, they can pull you back up. The problem becomes is if you keep on tumbling down, and now you're down at the very bottom at dorsal vagal, you don't skip zones. You kind of have to still pass up and down through them. So then that becomes a really difficult time sometimes. If you're so far down, you can still get pulled up, but it's going to be a longer process. It's going to be a little bit tougher. And also you can do those self-regulation. This is stuff like yoga, meditation, breathing, to kind of help self-regulate you, so that you can, and part of it really is knowing, knowing what your body's doing. Am I slipping into a stressor response? Am I going into sympathetic activation? And if I am, what am I going to do for it? I know that meditation or mindfulness, or I know I need to take a few breaths, and that'll pull me out. And again, that safetiness of that co-regulation. Who do I have in my support system? Who can I go to help me possibly get out of where I'm headed? So really relying on those pieces to help you move. And it all comes down to knowing your body, your and what works for you. Also knowing what it is you're going through. Sometimes people know that if I have the following stressors, I know that this is what works for me, or I know this is who I can go to. It's something that we talk about in resiliency, is having those support systems in play, to where I know that if I'm here, I need to make sure that this person or this tool is nearby to help pull me out. It's like being at a party, and you are in ventral vagal, and you are fantastic and doing great. And now somebody has come through and maybe bumped you, and now you've spilt your drink. It's all over, a couch or your clothing or something like that. You immediately start getting angry, stressed out. Oh my gosh, what's going on? This whole thing is now a disaster. And so now you've entered into that sympathetic activation mode. Those stressors are coming on, those internal alarms are activating. So now it's, what do you do with this? Do I self-regulate myself to bring myself back up? Most likely at a party, we're going to have that engagement. We're co-regulating now with somebody. So we're going to have somebody possibly who's going to be coming in and saying, hey, listen, I'm sorry that this happened. I will help you. I will, let's go get you changed. I will help you clean this area and stuff. So they're now coming in and helping you regulate. They're helping pull you back up into ventral vagal. What ends up happening sometimes, though, if that didn't happen and you continue to stress over it and you go deeper and deeper and deeper down, now you're so far down, it's not impossible to get back up, but it definitely is a little bit more tougher to get back up from that. And you might take extra time to do so. But it can be done. And that's kind of how you shift up and down throughout your, throughout that ladder, so to speak. But it really comes down to, you have to know what's going on in yourself. You have to know what's going on in your body. What are those feelings and sensations of those stress moments? When I'm feeling stressed, when I know I'm slipping into sympathetic activation, I can feel certain things, maybe certain trembling or certain tightness in your chest. Maybe there is, you're going to feel that increased heart rate. That anxiety is going to start creeping in. So when people start recognizing that these are stress activation pieces, and these are those internal alarms that are going off, people can then catch themselves. And if they have done their work and they know, this is what happens, this is what I need to do, this is that tool I need to grab, then they can help get themselves out of that. And if you do that long enough, I am proof. If you do this long enough, your body just all of a sudden starts automatically kind of doing it on its own. My body will start slipping into that sympathetic activation with something, and it immediately kicks in and immediately tells me, nope, you're fine. You know that this is not what's really happening. You know that this is not that time or that place or that case or whatever it is. My body automatically now just kicks in, and it's because it's with constant work and that I've been able to it's kind of train yourself. It's kind of that Pavlovian, experience where, my body now just knows. So it pretty much self-regulates itself on its own. But it does take some time to do that, but it can be done. And, so.
Is that kind of a result of neuroplasticity? I know when I was talking with therapists in the past, I had thought patterns that would kind of bump me a little bit down that ladder. And the term that was used for me and for my therapist was neuroplasticity. Can we talk just very briefly about that and kind of how that intersects with this theory?
Do you want me to do it, or Christy, or
either of you would be more qualified than I. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I'll jump in very quickly just to say that when we're talking about trauma, we are talking about those kind of Pavlovian associations. We tend to have sort of this like burned, deeply ingrained experience when something overwhelming happens to us, and that can cause us to get a little bit stuck there. And so neuroplasticity is just this idea that our nervous system doesn't need to be stuck, or rather to say our body has an ability to rewire itself and come up with new connections, but that requires a little bit of effort, a little bit of repetition. As Annette was talking about repetition, the term that I often use with my clients when I'm discussing a lot of these ideas is just mental muscle memory. When you go through that routine, when you go through that pattern over and over and over, you notice yourself starting to slip down, starting to become more closed off, more cold, more rigid, more stuck. by intentionally and knowingly pushing against that bit by bit by bit, that impulse to push back becomes more deeply ingrained than the initial trauma through time. And neuroplasticity is really just the ability to do that, the ability to rewire our nervous systems based on new criteria, based on new situations.
Mm-hmm.
So, Annette, I know that these are really complex ideas. I use a lot of these ideas in my practice, and I love the way that you walked us through it. I definitely want to talk a little bit more about some of the co-regulation pieces and a little bit more of the sex and secular sexuality, because this is a huge part of how we relate to one another and how we form partnerships and communicate and everything else. Before we do that, though, V, I'd love to jump on the phones.